All right, Stay Spiritual team, we have a special one here for you today. We have a guest with us, Angelo Dilullo, MD, author of his book, Awake, It Is Your Turn. He also has a YouTube channel entitled Simply Always Awake. And so we're just going to get into this, ask him some questions about awakening. And if you've ever been curious about this within the spiritual community, this is going to be a great episode. So welcome. This is amazing to have you. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Angelo.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, this is exciting. So I thought we would just jump right into the deep end, right off the start. The $1,000,000 question. You've got your book. It's called Awake. It's your turn. There are many people who watch our channel who come from all types of aspects of life, different belief systems and stuff like that. And this term awake is being thrown around a lot lately by different groups and people. What does awakening or being awake mean for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was just talking to a friend about this today that awakening, awakeness, awake, it's a popular term, but it's also in the authentic meaning in the way I'm going to speak about of it actually occurring to somebody. It's also becoming more common. I think it's really becoming more widespread probably than it was certainly 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so it's that the truth of that, the fact that it's becoming a more popular conversation and so forth, lends itself to some potential side effects. One is that, our minds are busy. Our minds make a lot out of things that aren't necessarily there and so forth. So it's very easy to talk about things in imprecise ways, or just, there's no exact right way to talk about awakening necessarily, but it's easy to talk about it in ways that don't necessarily represent a fundamental shift in your experience of reality or your experience of yourself, or a shift in identity, which is exactly what I would call it. So I would call awakening truly a shift in what you take yourself to be that is undeniable, self-validating, thoroughgoing. It's very, very transformative, more than essentially anything can be. And it's hard to know why that is until it happens, but when it happens, it's extremely clear that something has fundamentally not just changed, but dissolved into something far more vast than you had even imagined was possible or the case of being. So it's not just an experience. There are many types of experiences: mystical experiences, psychedelic experiences, mind-blowing experiences, random experiences, caused experiences, and that's great. But this isn't by nature an experience occurring to somebody. It's a shift or a fundamental transformation in the one that experiences. So it is quite different than an experience, no matter how dramatic an experience is. So sometimes that distinction, I think, is helpful.
I was wondering, I know you've explained this a lot, but maybe in the short form, because we have a lot of questions we want to ask you. How did you how did you discover this? How did you fall into this?
Well, so for me, the real answer is suffering. I had a very, I would say, concentrated sense of something being wrong in my thoughts. I don't mean I was psychotic. I didn't have mental illness per se, although I did have some pretty significant anxiety, but rather I could process. I could process information. I could function, but something about the nature of thoughts themselves, the nature of me taking myself to be a thought or a collection of thoughts and beliefs, that just felt very restricting somehow, very uncomfortable, and I couldn't not notice it. I couldn't just forget about it. It was really at the forefront of my experience, by the time I was in my late teens into early 20s, and I had no idea what to do about it. But what was interesting is, in retrospect, it sounds even worse, but it was really a blessing in disguise that I had the sense that no one really, at least no one I had seen, and the usual ways we talk about therapy and things like that, I had the sense that wasn't really going to address this fundamental issue for me. None of those ways that people talked about feeling better and thinking about themselves. Like I could pick up something from that. There's some truth to those things, positive thinking and all this, but I fundamentally could just perceive that people were themselves perceiving things the way I was, and yet it didn't seem as distressing to most people. So it felt very hopeless in a way. It felt like, what kind of miracle would get me out of this? I have no idea. I didn't even really posit that there was a way out of that, until something clicked. And the way it clicked for me, and I've come to find out it clicks very differently for different people, but the way it clicked for me was hearing about enlightenment, hearing about Buddhism specifically, although that's not the only mode, of course. But hearing about it in such a way from a person who I'm almost convinced at this point had done it themselves, was talking about it in a very precise way that actually sort of transmitted the experience of it to me, the possibility. And when I was hearing this lecture by this person, this was an undergrad, and he was a guest lecturer in a class I was taking. I just raised my hand and I said, "Is that possible? What you're talking about? Is that possible, like in this lifetime?" Because I'd always thought of enlightenment and Buddhism as something that happens to monks and monastic people and takes lifetimes, and it's some super mystical thing that's beyond me.
I think a lot of people do.
Yes, they absolutely still do, of course. But however he said it to me, very much transmitted, like he just like handed me this message that said, it's nothing about that. It's nothing about these people from the past. It's nothing about some mystical stuff that you don't know about yet. It's actually way closer than all of that. It's so close that it's going to address, or can address, that fundamental pain you've been carrying around with you that felt so personal, so in a sense shameful, because it was like so hidden. And it was like telling me this message. It was saying, hey, that's what this addresses. And it addresses it in a very real way. And that hit for me. And I realized, whoa, okay. Another interesting aspect of this is, even though that happened and I felt it, I really genuinely felt something sort of start to shift a little bit. I didn't walk out of that classroom going, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to go join a temple. Like that didn't happen. For some reason, it was an instinct that it had to germinate a little longer, I suppose.
Yeah.
It took a couple years. And then a couple years later, I was meditating for a few years. I had learned to meditate at probably 19 years old. Meditation felt good, but it didn't have a transformative, not deeply transformative experiential aspect to it. So I was kind of carrying that around, I think, without thinking about it much, but I think the seed was planted. And then there was just a collection of events that occurred. One had to do with a breakup, like a romantic breakup. There was just a feeling of very intense contracted suffering up here in the head, and lots of self-referential thoughts. And I opened a book called The Three Pillars of Zen. And in that book, there's a chapter where they actually verbatim discuss how a teacher talks to a student in a very specific school of Zen, where they're working directly on breaking through this mind barrier. And it made sense. It made complete sense to me. It was, for me at that moment, the kind of thing where I said, I've suffered so much and I am suffering so much. I don't care if I die. I'm going to just keep doing this. I'm going to find my way through this. I have to. And it felt instinctually like, this is time. There's no where else I can go right now. It was kind of exciting, but it was also very desperate, had a lot of desperation to it. Felt kind of ominous after a while. As I started to penetrate a little bit, I started to really dig in the way they were talking about. It felt big. Like, this is beyond anything I had experienced that I remembered. It was mysterious, didn't know what it was, but I also knew there was nowhere else I could go. I had to go deeper into this. And then a shift happened, and we can talk about that if you want to. Or
I don't want to hog all the questions, so that's okay. I'm ruminating on some. I was thinking kind of the fertile ground for this experience to happen. Does it almost have to be through suffering, or can it happen any other way?
Yeah, from what I've seen, there's very often a component of suffering. Now, when I say suffering, that can be really off-putting. Someone hearing this could say, oh, well, I don't want to have my life to have to get painful for this to happen. It's not that kind of suffering necessarily, because what's interesting is when I talk about what I mean by suffering, often people who would have previously said, I don't suffer, all of a sudden they realize they are suffering. They go, oh my God, that's what you mean by all that anxiety, all those thoughts all day long and feeling self-conscious. Yeah, that's what I mean by suffering. It feels so normal because we're so used to it that a lot of people wouldn't question it as something other than just the way life has to be. So it's not like you have to go out and add suffering to your life, but there is some recognition of our own suffering that often leads to this deeper investigation. And there's also an element of curiosity. There's an element of this sort of innocent curiosity about the way we perceive ourselves, others, the world, life, thoughts, emotions. It just feels off. But we are curious. Is there a more real way to do that? Is there a more real way to exist, to be, to feel? So there's also a curiosity component as well. But I do want to say to anyone listening to this, the right roadmap is your roadmap. I don't tell people the right way to wake up. I show people that they know the right way to wake up. That's what I do. And so it may look different than anything I'm saying for you, but if there's something that's clicking in what I'm saying, if something's going, oh, wait a minute, that's what I've been wanting to address. I just didn't know it was okay. I didn't know how. You're already in a good place. That is fertile ground to wake up. You know.
Yeah, and sorry, I also don't want to awkwardly not say anything.
No.
But I think that's what makes your content so accessible too, is the kind of open way that you take it, and the getting away from beliefs. You know, like we were talking before the show started, and we were talking about sleep actually, and like, you know, somebody struggling with sleep, and like, well, what do you do before you fall asleep? I worry about sleeping, and I worry about the next day, and like, well, you know, let that go. In fact, give up on even trying to sleep. And then, you know, oftentimes when you get rid of the trying, it happens, right?
Yeah.
And when you were talking about suffering, it just made me think that maybe suffering sometimes is just struggling with the paradox of life and just the general contrast of things. There's always a catch to everything. How do you, if you're certain that there's a way to like enjoy things, but there's a little bit of bad and everything good, and a little bit of good and everything bad, how do you get past that? So this is where my head's been at. I have like 1,000 questions. I'm just trying to zero in on something. Yeah. But again, going back to originally what I was saying, I think that's what makes your content very accessible, is the open-ended way you approach it. It's going to be different for everybody potentially. And
my first feeling when the first video that I even watched of yours, it actually expressed, it's very obvious in your content that you make it like believable, like it's possible, like this is attainable, this is something. When you listen to other spiritual teachers, some, like you said, it feels distant, it feels like that could never, but you make it sound like it's attainable. Even in your book, you know, I'm trying to follow the process of the book and just take it slowly and go through it that way. But it feels like it's attainable, which is pretty good.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, no, it is. Are there, like, when you had your awakening experience, I think I've heard you mention that it wasn't like you had arrived to the end, but that over time you feel like there's deeper and deeper awakenings. What is that? Like, is it infinite? Does it go forever?
That's a really good question. So for me, I would say, roughly speaking, it happened in 2 phases. The first phase, I'm just going to call waking up to pure consciousness for the purposes of what we're talking about here. And that was when all of those thought structures that felt so challenging and binding and sticky, kind of what you were saying a moment ago about it feels like, well, I should be able to make myself happy, but why is there always a downside? And then I shift some attention or will over here, and then something else, there's another downside. It just felt like the game was fixed, you know. But I realized that was all thoughts. Like the thoughts themselves had that sense of like fractioning reality up and dividing my own internal experience up. When those barriers just dissolved into the boundlessness of consciousness itself, that was very, very freeing. It was realized I'm already anywhere I could ever have thought I wanted to go. I'm already there. The sense of seeking some place or some set of circumstances or even another person was actually made out of the thoughts. And when the boundaries of those thoughts came down, I was already in all those places. It just felt so expansive and complete in and of itself. And it was immediately available and true of everyone, for sure. But I could also see how the mind seems to still section it off if you're not really clear on what's happening. So it takes some discernment or practice to realize that. So that was one stage of it for me. That's and it would be technically called awakening. Now, beyond that, it gets very difficult to talk about. But I will just say that the next phase, which actually did have a few steps to it, a handful of steps to it, was something like the expansiveness, the consciousness, the beingness that was infinite, which felt very much like that. Itself was contained or seemed to be contained or structured. And I didn't notice that that itself was also a construct. And when that construct fell, it was infinite beyond a container. It was infinite in dimension, infinite in subtlety, infinite inwardly, infinite outwardly. It was infinitely flexible, infinitely clear. Very difficult to talk about this, but also like even more instinctually obvious when that happens. So that can come in one big sort of bottom falling out. Sometimes it comes in layers for people. It's different for everyone, but do
you carry that around with you? Like after you experience something, is that something that you like, okay, you go back into daily life and you're doing your groceries and paying your bills and stuff. Is that like, are you feeling that always?
Yep.
Is it always there? Yeah,
it is. It's always here. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
The access is infinite.
It seems like
it doesn't mean, I want to say what it doesn't mean though, because it's easy to believe. It means you don't ever have problems, you never have challenges, you never get anything wrong in the relative world. Like you can still make mistakes. Like those things can happen in the relative sense, but the energetic, instinctual, visceral knowing of what I'm talking about, the boundlessness, the clarity, it's just always there. And it's very strange. This is one of those things that can infuriate people to hear, but it's also there for you. It's there for every single person.
Yeah.
But I can see clearly how the mind seems to compartmentalize a sense of self into this little place, which seems to obscure it. But it doesn't really even obscure it. It's a very strange thing, but it is here all the time.
I get the sense that once you get the ball rolling with this, like a good bet that you can do is to get some experiences. Your channel is very good. I watched some videos of it, and I was actually I can't remember the name of the video, but on one of them you were giving some techniques, like what is a thought, that sort of thing, and I felt like I was having some kind of an experience from actually the directions that you were giving. But I remarked at how quickly the ego's like, oh, I can't wait to tell people, or like I can't wait to go tell James that this is like, send him a link to this video or something, right? So how do you keep the ego out of the way, I guess, from letting that ball get rolling and actually turn into a full awakening experience?
Yeah, great question. And it's a very common experience that you're describing. It's totally normal, nothing wrong with it. You still have access. So the analogy that came to me, which I've never even thought of as you were saying it, would be something like if you're on the beach and you're just with your hands, you're digging a hole in the sand, and you dig like 6 inches, 8 inches down, and the water starts to fill at the bottom, and you'd think, oh, the hole's filling back up. But if you just keep digging, you pull that water out, you pull more sand out, you just keep going, you'll go deeper and deeper and deeper, even though the water seems to be filling it back up, or even the sand falling back in. That's kind of like the way let's call it the ego structure. It tends to sneak back in and try to co-opt things, and it goes, oh, I know about this. The problem is the part of the mind that's doing that is the one that's causing us to suffer in the first place. So it's not a bad thing that it's doing that. It's just uncomfortable sometimes. But over time, what happens is it's almost like you start to pick up its tricks, and you start to realize how uncomfortable it is to re-identify in those moments. And at some point, it's like the thoughts just get farther apart. The tendency to grab those thoughts get farther apart. They're less enticing. It's less interesting when you start to go off into this infinite space to go, oh, this is so cool. Let me talk to my friend about it. What you really realize is happening is you're kind of getting scared. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Some part of you is just backing off. And then often as that calms down and you have that tendency to run from it and reassociate with thoughts, that starts to calm. You'll start to feel a little bit more clarity, but much calmer space. And what not uncommonly happens then, as I bring up to people, just so people aren't too surprised if it happens, you can hit a very real fear barrier. It often doesn't last a super long time, but it's often quite intense. The body physically feels like a pretty intense fear because we're actually starting to truly disidentify from thoughts at that point. And when identity feels like it's being challenged, it's going to react as if it's a threat. and the body and the mind are very connected. So there's no actual threat, but your body won't know that. So I do tell people that because it doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens to a lot of people. And many times people will say, oh, I'm so glad I heard you say that, because that was really surprising, And then often you get past that and it's very calm, very, very calm.
Seems like the ego may try to like hide in different parts of you, like hide in your, like as a pain in your foot, like anything to keep you identified with this false identity, false association with the ego.
That's exactly right.
And it's interesting, like there's an interview that you have on your channel, and I apologize again, I don't remember who it was with, but it's a good one. All your content's good for people watching, but it's you interacting with another person that I guess is awakened, if that's the term. I hope that's correct of me to say and assume, but there's a lot of like, it's like you recognize each other or something. And I guess my question is it easier to have that awakening experience steamroll out and become a full-on awakening, or is it easier to maintain a spiritual practice if you're actually if the set and setting is proper? Like I'm trying to imagine somebody who's trying to meditate even, and they're in like a chaotic situation or surrounded by lower vibration things, I guess, for lack of a better term. Yeah. Are you going to want to put yourself in a situation that's conducive to awakening? Like, is that like a pretty pivotal step? And what do you do if that doesn't seem like an option?
Great question, man. You guys are coming up with some really, really good questions. So
my ego thanks you.
I mean, they're just really important questions, and they're really good. So when this catches you, when this, this can be intellectually interesting for someone, and all of a sudden it's something more than that. It's like it grabs you, and you're really wanting to dig in whatever way you can. When that happens, you'll often have the instinct to make some space, even if it's just meditate 30 minutes a day or something, or sit and inquire 30 minutes a day. You'll get the instinct to make some space, and almost everyone can do a little bit of that. Now, not everyone. I do know people who really are, say a single mother with 3 kids, and they do not have extra moments, or it's very rare. But even in that case, you'll find the space will open up for you somehow. Maybe while you're driving it, maybe when you're falling asleep, or you wake up at night, or who knows. So I find that the space is actually made, but having some intention about it can be helpful as well. If you have the bandwidth in your life to do that, make some space for it. Make some space to sit, to inquire, to really dig in, to not distract. With that said, awakening is so brilliant in that it wakes you up right in your life as it is at any given moment. And often people are surprised that when it does come, it often, but not always, comes when things are tumultuous. When your mind would say, this is the last time I'll ever wake up. There's so much grittiness going on in my life. I just had a divorce. I've had all this stress and all this stuff, and something just drops. Something just gets so tired of suffering, it just lets go. And then you do sit down for a minute, and you sit down for 10 minutes, and all of a sudden it's an hour later, mind is completely clear. You stand up and everything looks different. I mean, happens all different ways, but awakening, you don't have to make your life right for awakening to happen. You have to make your heart open to it. That's really what it is. You have to really show the universe it's your intention, to be honest. But you don't have to go micromanage your life and figure it all out and stuff, because you can't. You try, and then this thing blows up, and then you're putting effort over here, and then now you got to worry about this stuff. And life's like that, right? We're busy and all. So don't worry about the perfect conditions, but if you can, make some space for it. Make some space for silence and peace and inquiry and meditation. Do.
To piggyback off of what you just said there, as kind of like maybe a block, is intelligence a factor in awakening?
That's a really good question. As I describe in my book multiple times, and I say frequently, one of the barriers to awakening, and barrier to me it doesn't mean it's going to prevent it, because if your heart is in it, nothing's going to prevent it. I mean, if it's the most important thing for you, and you really keep giving it your attention, something's going to it's going to shift. It may take 2 years, may take 2 months, I don't know, but it's going to happen. But when I say barrier, I mean something that kind of slows the process down and/or is a convenient distraction that's tricky. One of them is it's not that you're intelligent, but it's that you're intellectually approaching this. You're learning everything about it. You're learning all the suttas. You're learning all the stages and everyone that's talked about it. And you're intellectually approaching it. Like, the more knowledge I gain, the more likely I am to wake up. That's a bit of a mistake in evaluation. It's not about learning. And in fact, for people whose identity is tied into their intelligence, it can certainly be a barrier. Because without knowing it, you'll be using intellectual knowledge because it's comfortable for you in one sense. It makes you feel in control, makes you feel like you know. You'll be using that to kind of stabilize yourself. And this is a little bit about destabilizing the ego structure. So I don't think intelligence in and of itself is helpful or problematic necessarily. It's certainly not necessary. There are people who wake up very quickly who aren't what I would call intellectuals, who don't care to learn about any of the details about awakening or Buddhism or Hinduism or Advaita Vedanta or any of it. They don't care, and they don't even understand it or know it. But instinctually, they know what this is about. It's a wordless knowing. It's a non-conceptual knowing. People like that wake up very quickly often. So if anything, intelligence can be a bit of a hindrance if you're really identified with it. But you can go beyond it for sure. You can go beyond knowledge. This is so far beyond knowledge. The way we think about it, it's quite a thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've heard you even say like, that like, yeah, the intellect can be a blockade, like trying to figure it out. Like, awakening's this thing, it's this thing, but it's really, you get that out of there. It's not that thing. We had kind of a silly question. We were just talking about. We were like, can animals be enlightened? That was kind of like,
is there enlightenment without humans? Essentially,
it's a really interesting question. Well, one part of me will say I can't know because I'm not an animal. I can't put myself in the side of anyone else's cognition or intellect or anything.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, the deeper realization goes, the more I resonate with the way animals move. There's a naturalness to them that is not just like I look at them and I learn something intellectual. Like, I energetically vibe with the movement. It feels I really resonate with just being around animals and being in nature in general. But by the technical definition of enlightenment, it's the knowingly being the sort of source void or something like that.
Yeah.
That an animal isn't knowingly that necessarily. Eckhart Tolle would say, they're at a state of consciousness just below, human self-consciousness. So they're not self-conscious yet. So they haven't taken the next step beyond self-consciousness. And yet there's something extremely fluid and simple about them. And there's a lot you can learn about them. They're very flexible. They don't hold on to energy very much. So they can get up, run around, do the thing they're doing, and then immediately they're back resting, meditating, just totally at peace. I love being around animals. It's just lovely.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've even heard some people talk about like altered states of consciousness, maybe with like ketamine therapy or something. I've never done that, but people have said that in that state that they almost got a sense of like a diminished ego, I guess, and like getting the sense of being more creature like than that solid ego sense. And I just wonder if something to do with like an animal's consciousness is like not impeded by an ego, like the same way a human would, right? And that's the other thing. There's a lot of talk of this, which is, again, I think that's probably why it hinders the logical mind from like grasping it, is because it's all paradoxical, right? It's like you're not gaining anything. You're getting rid of all this beliefs, like you mentioned in some of your videos, that sort of thing. And I think what you said about intelligence, if anything, maybe being a hindrance, is probably going to bring some people some hope. Mm-hmm. I hope that makes people hopeful for it. Mm-hmm. But I also think if you do have an intelligence, maybe you could grasp the concept of like letting that go in a sense. Like there was a practice I was working on that I got a lot of relief from, which was essentially radical acceptance. The ego is always like fighting things, right? And so something I just stumbled across. I just was thinking one day and I was like, I'm like constantly resisting things. What happens if I accept all of it, accept my worst fears and just watch that for a while? Mm-hmm. And it was like a temporary, really strong effect. I was like, holy smoke, a ton of relief. But then the ego finds clever ways of coming back, and then it's like, it's back the next week.
That's right. Yeah, those are, to me, things like that, experiences like that are quite pretastes of awakening. you're touching into to very deep truths. But as you noticed, that ego structure, doesn't take that lying down. It'll step back for a minute and then it'll find its way back in. That's why we really go after the identity structure with this type of stuff. But you're right on the money. When we get to this place of this kind of radical acceptance, there's equanimity is what people really want. I think it's what I wanted, but I didn't know what it was. It's what I thought I would get out of everything: relationships and money and security and all the things, the surrogates we chase. What I was really looking for was equanimity. Equanimity is just feeling like you're in the right place at the right time and you're okay, and that's it. And you feel, in a sense, you just feel connected that way, but you don't even have to worry about feeling connected, because that's also in a sense a surrogate. It's just a deep ease with life.
I find myself saying like crazy stuff at get-togethers. I'll be like, I feel like in 50 years people aren't going to have to talk anymore. We're just going to be able to get together and vibe off each other, like this like monkey, sounds signaling to each other thing. And I think that because we're so logical, we're so philosophical, we're so logical. And it's like, it seems like the cause of our troubles. It's like the very thing we're trying to do, like you said, like accomplishing things and all this stuff to try to get somewhere is like the hindrance of our enjoyment of this experience.
Yeah. It's like we have to create artificial internal worlds when we try to get somewhere. Like the seeking mind requires us to fool ourselves a little bit, because we're not going anywhere. We're right here. But it's wonderful to be right here when there are no ego barriers anymore, when there are no sense of physical boundaries anymore. Not that you could go anywhere, but it's just so wonderful to be inhabiting of this experience, this non-dualistic experience. But yeah, when we start seeking in the mind and imagining, well, then I'll be happy if I can get that. And then we start imagining it, then we imagine strategies. Then that makes us feel a little bit out of sorts, right? Out of ourself. We're out of the body. We're getting a little disassociated into the mind. So then we find a mental way to cover that up. And right. And then it's really pretty quickly starts to become this propagating thought after thought chasing thought experience. And we're really going after breaking that spell in a very real way with that initial awakening.
There's a lot of talk about ego death in the spiritual community, but I'm curious, like, is there a positive, useful place for that ego?
No.
No?
No, I don't think it's necessary. The way I would define it, I've often say, my book, I kind of say this, and I say this when I talk about the ego in videos. Yeah. I don't want people to reify or solidify this idea of an ego like a little homunculus inside your head pulling levers. I mean, there isn't really anything in there like that, even neurophysiologically. It's just a set of processes. But the sum total of those processes has a certain, feel to it for sure. It has an internal subjective experience, but also has defense mechanisms. It has ways of kind of hiding things from itself. And when that just disentangles into this expanse of consciousness, you really kind of see it wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary. It was almost like a nervous knot in the middle of consciousness that just never really did what it said it was doing. But bless its heart, it's trying. Like it just feels out of sorts, and it's trying to make itself feel better. But since it's sort of made out of division, it can only keep seemingly dividing consciousness. But the side effects of that just keep going on. So at some point, it just really clicks that whole ego mechanism, the selfing mechanism, it's not necessary. And the juice that we love about life, the real juicy stuff, which is equanimity and peace and the sense of freedom and just being in the right place at the right time, all of that's already here. It's built into this. It is here all the time. But strangely, we only get little tastes of it here and there because we're listening to our thoughts so often. But of course, when we get the taste, our thoughts will say, oh, I gave you that. Here, let me show you how to get more of it. And then we go chasing another thought. Yeah. So it's tricky that way. It's a little sneaky, a little insidious.
And sometimes after awakening, people talk about having like a dark night of the soul. Did you have that experience, like after your awakening?
I've never gone through something and said to myself, this is a dark night of the soul in particular, but I've definitely gone through some pretty intense emotion work and shadow work and that kind of thing. It's a real thing. What's interesting is some people highlight it and talk about it, find that valuable. Other people really don't talk about it much. But the people I know well that have gone through this process and are continuing to go through it, they go through a good amount of shadow work. But that initial shift is so expansive in a sense that it opens up a vast amount of space to do this work. That's the best way I can say it. It becomes quite gritty in a sense. It becomes very granular. You kind of go down through the emotion body and through any spaces that you've avoided, and you can't not do it. You have to see it all and feel it all, but it turns out to be okay. And over time, it starts to feel very intelligent. Like, yeah, this is exactly where I've really always wanted to go. I've been avoiding it, but this really is where I want to go ultimately. And it's paradoxical, but in those depths of the visceral, gritty experience of aliveness, you find more expansion in a sense. It's a paradoxical thing. It's like the deeper you go in, the deeper you go outward, and they're very much interrelated. And usually at some point, I wouldn't say that the shadow work or that internal investigation of shadow material and emotional material just stops. It never completely stops, I would say, but it does often come to this place where it's much more mild and tolerable. And what's very much primary experientially is the clarity, the peace, the quietude that's always available, and the ease, just knowing that even when things really don't go like you would think you want them to, they're fine. Everything's really okay.
Can enlightenment change you physiologically? Like let's say that somebody's got a lot of trauma or like an actual mental illness or something like that. And I think that if that is the case, that's like a good thing to address, whether you're, also seeking enlightenment or not. Like the more I look into it, the more I think about this, I think trauma work's pretty important, especially our day and age. And same with like approaching mental illness seriously. But can awakening actually like solve some of those issues? You mentioned that there's like an intelligence and a vastness in there. Like, I'm not awakened, so I don't know. I have no reference for that really, or I don't know it. But when you experience that, can that intelligence kind of like lead your body? I'm struggling to have the words here because
I get what you're asking. So I've seen this play out in so many ways with so many people that I have a lot of reference experiences, and I can say it's done some really interesting things to people. It can change your physiology sometimes. It can make some sort of disease processes seem to go away, but there's no counting on that. It's very unpredictable, I would say. It certainly doesn't just eliminate all your health problems or something like that. I would not expect that, and it probably won't do that. As far as mental illness specifically, I'm always a little cautious, mostly just because of stability. If somebody's had mental illness with instability, has had psychosis, inpatient treatment, things like that, doesn't mean they can't wake up, but I would be cautious, and I would work really closely with somebody, like someone that you live near, that at a teacher at a temple or something, a Zen center, someone who just has worked in this space before. That's the kind of thing I generally recommend with somebody with mental illness, but it really depends on the severity and so forth, and your stability. If you feel reasonably stable in life and have for a long time, you'll probably do fine with this. Have I seen it cure mental illness? I've seen people, so anxiety and depression, it often does cure. Yeah, those are so pervasive, and they are mental illness technically based on the way we define mental illness, but they are also largely, in my experience, in my opinion, they're largely they're the medical way we describe suffering, to be honest. And so I find those tend to go almost completely away, if not away. For me, I had pretty severe anxiety, even like sort of panic stuff when I was younger. I don't have anything like that anymore. Depression, I would say I was less prone to it. I probably had some form of depression. Don't have it. I can feel deep sadness. There's no depression. Things like that. So now with something like bipolar disorder, where you're on mood stabilizer medications and things like that, I always tell people to be very cautious, especially right after an awakening or something, because it's such a shift and change. It takes time to integrate. That's probably not the time to try to go off meds or something, and never do it yourself. Always work with your your prescriber, and do things slowly like you should. But I've seen it take people with bipolar disorder that was much more prominent in their life and make it much more manageable. So that's the best way I can summarize that. Something like schizophrenia, again, that you got to be really careful with because there's psychosis and stuff. I have known people who have schizophrenia who work with this stuff. They're very cautious with it, which is good, I think, from what I've seen, and take it slowly, and that's what you should do. But similarly, I wouldn't expect to suddenly not need antipsychotic medications or something because it is a neurophysiologic process. Similar to like diabetes, I wouldn't expect someone to wake up and just tell them to stop taking their insulin or something. It would be not a good idea. So that's generally how I would say it. Like one of the funniest things for me was when I learned to meditate, strangely, was a few years before awakening. I went from having really bad asthma to having really mild asthma, like almost overnight. Within a few weeks of meditating, it just was very strange, and it was very obvious to me. I didn't expect it at all, and sort of stayed that way. I still have asthma, but it's pretty mild. So, anything that unties these like dualistic knots and these energetic knots and all this stress that we carry in our bodies and minds definitely has the potential to calm things down, especially that have to do with anxiety and stress and stuff.
So for someone who was completely new to this, who like stumbled across this video somehow, what's like one thing that you could give that person to be like, just start with this, or just what would that be?
I love that question. I'm telling you, that's like my favorite question right there, actually. When I wrote my book, when I wrote my first chapter, every video I make pretty much, I always have in the back of my mind considering that person's watching, because they are. Yeah. This is going to be seen by some random person because YouTube's going to serve it to them or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
So, I love the question. The message is this for someone watching this: like, I know what it feels like to suffer, and I know you may be suffering. Suffering doesn't mean the story of your life. Suffering means something about the way it feels internally to be you feels off. And the message is, it's not actually you that's off. What you really are is perfectly okay, more than perfectly okay. It's what you're taking yourself to be because of thoughts. That's what's making it feel so uncomfortable. And there is a way out of that. There's a way to break the spell of the thoughts that make us constantly self-conscious, self-aware, and in that sort of thought loop. That's what we're talking about when we talk about awakening. It may not be interesting to you right now. It may not resonate. But if it does resonate, I have really good news for you because people do wake up from that. They break that spell, and I did. So that's the message. And trust yourself. The timing may be not right now, but in a year, that might sound very appealing to you. The point is, you were not born to suffer, and there is a way out of it. That's the message.
Yeah. One of your message. It seems like one of your major practices is, what is it? Introspection is one of the, like, over meditation. Like, I know you meditate. I kind of meditate. I feel a little bit like you, where like I've done a lot of meditation and I just don't feel like that's kind of got me exactly where I want to go. And you talk a lot about, do I got that right? Introspection? Like
I don't use the term introspection a lot of times. I use the term self-inquiry.
Self-inquiry. Sorry. Yeah. Self-inquiry.
Introspection's good too. I mean, what I really try to do is, one way or another, I try to get somebody to direct their attention back inward in a way that they look back at the most fundamental sense of who or what they are. Something that they've been looking from for so many years, and then looking from through the lens of thought for so many years that they've actually forgotten was there. That's really what I'm ultimately getting somebody to like look back into somehow, feel back into. In Zen, it would be called like taking the backward step. Now, there are many ways to do it. You can do it through self-inquiry. Who am I? And then the thought will say, well, I'm Joe. I'm born in Sacramento. Okay, those are thoughts and memories. But if those thoughts and memories weren't there right now, I'm still here. So who am I? What am I? And then look for it. And the mind will come up with answers for a while. Oh, well, you're this, you're that, you're a thinking being, you're a human being. But you notice, wait, those are actually thoughts, though. Those are thoughts. What is it that's aware of those thoughts right now, intimately in my experience? That's self-inquiry. And you just keep at it, and the flavor of it will change usually. At first, it may feel uncomfortable or confusing, or like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of thinking. But you'll dial in, and all of a sudden, it has a different flavor. It starts to feel a little more deep, or a little more interesting, or a little more expansive. That's what usually tells you that's a good way to look for you. That's a good way to approach this, through self-inquiry. You can ask, where am I? Precisely where in this? Like, I feel like I'm in here somewhere. Like, it feels like there's some space in here that's taking in the information, right? Looking through the eyes. see if I can find that precisely, and just touch back into it. There's another way to do it. And then there's koan. There are koans, which are the traditional Zen way of doing it. But the initial koan is the key with this, and that is often the koan, what is mu? And mu doesn't have a literal meaning. It has an old story attached to it, but with the way that the point of that is actually ingenious. That's kind of how I woke up, actually, because the book I was reading was talking about that. And the idea with it isn't anything about a koan. It's not anything about understanding Zen necessarily. It's about becoming so absorbed into mu itself, into that one sound or that one word, becoming so absorbed that the mind just stops, but in a very, very deep way. And that's what we call a koan. Sometimes I call it a one-pointed approach. And you don't have to have a koan to do that, actually. Sometimes you just find this almost like singularity of intention to just go beyond thought. And you find that enticing space in the mind, and you just keep going toward that. So there are a lot of ways to approach this, and some of these may sound a little philosophical or strange, but when you try them, when you apply some effort and just sit down and do it for 10 minutes, you may find one that clicks for you, and that's a good approach.
I call it pigeonholing the ego, like trapping the ego, right? So, I said that one thing that I was trying was radical acceptance, and then the opposite of that was like radical imagining my wildest dreams coming. Like, I think sometimes people take for granted the imagination. It's like if you go inward and you have somewhat of a usable imagination, like you can go all kinds of places with it, and you might as well explore, right? And then I think after you've exhausted yourself doing that, like analyzing to death, and you're almost frozen, the world provides you with somebody like yourself who can just crack that frozen ice block and potentially awaken people for sure. Do you think that at this time in history, reality is producing more teachers like yourself? Like it seems like, I don't know, I can't get over the fact that you seem accessible in a way that many teachers before you haven't been. Are we entering into a time period, do you think, where there's going to be more awakened people that can help more people awaken?
I really do. Yeah. And I mean, part of it's the internet, even when I was going through this stuff and suffering and had an awakening in 97, there was an internet in 97, but very few people were really on it. Like I didn't have access to turning on YouTube and finding realized human beings. I didn't know. I really didn't know about this stuff aside from hearing about Buddhism in classes here and there, but that's going to be limited by the person talking about it. Maybe very much a historical, scholarly type of approach. But you have access now on the internet to people who are very much awake, and it's a profound effect I've found. And it's interesting. I didn't talk about this for many years at all until I did, and something just started happening where I was just chatting with people and noticing shifts in them. But I've seen some remarkable awakenings. Just very surprising how fast people can wake up. It's not everyone, and it doesn't have to be, and that's fine. You don't necessarily want to wake up really fast because it's a very, very steep, intense experience to go through. It's really quite something. But it's amazing that it happens. And sometimes it feels like happenstance. Like I just bumped into that person, and just that random encounter really triggered this unwinding of their whole ego structure and all that. So I think, wow, what's going to happen when they bump into somebody and that person bumps into somebody? So I do think it's sort of snowballing, to be honest.
I'm thinking about kind of like the scientific community, and a quote, and I'm going to totally butcher this, but I was thinking of that Nikola Tesla quote where he talks about when science finally, moves beyond just the simple materialist paradigm and starts exploring more things like what we're talking about right now, the doors will blow wide open on what we can accomplish. Do you think that we're getting close to that? Like, because now that this message, like 10 years ago, I didn't know that this was even a thing. Like we did, like you introduced me to spiritual teachers probably in 2016. Like not that, like before that, I didn't even know non-duality, awakening, enlightenment. I didn't even know that was a thing. How did we miss that for all of the majority 90s of our lives? And then all of a sudden it's like, what is this? What is this thing? Yeah.
I'll tell you, when I read that section in the 3 Pillars of Zen in 1997, it was a couple weeks before awakening for me. I didn't know that, but it didn't take long because I was so ready for it. But that's exactly how I felt. Like why isn't everybody talking about this? Why isn't everybody shouting this from the rooftops? Because I've been looking for it my whole damn life and I didn't even know it. Like, how is this just hidden in some random book? Then it's like, well, where else is it? Obviously it's other places in the world, but I hadn't come in contact with it. So it really is it's just such a powerful thing that we're talking about. It has a way of propagating itself that just, I already know talking to you guys, this is going to affect people. Some people are going to watch this, go, I don't know what they're talking about. Some people are going to watch this and they're going to blow themselves wide open. It just happens. I can't predict that, but I've seen it again and again and again, and it has very powerful effects. I'm not saying Angelo has powerful effects. I'm saying whatever this movement is that woke me up, that allows me to talk to other people, and they seem to wake up, and then they wake each other up, and it really starts to propagate. It's very powerful. And good. Yeah. So
yeah, let's have less people angry at each other in traffic.
Well, you talk a lot about like fertile soil. Maybe much of what is going on in the world right now, especially like maybe this is allowing for that. Like, do you see awakening as like an evolutionary process? Like, is this what humanity needs to go through to get to the next stage, all like collectively?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. There's a very strange thing about this awakeness that we were talking about, and I'll say it, and it can sound bad, but it's not, because it's just part of the story. But there's something here that doesn't actually care how anything goes, because it's already perfect. There's perfection in everything, life, death, all of it. It's just utter perfection. So I really don't have my finger on the scale. It's interesting. I don't have a dog in the fight, but somehow out of that complete equanimity about the way the world is and where it's going to go, comes this strange expression that seems to really help people wake up. In the relative sense, I actually believe without a mass awakening, we might doom ourselves. Like, we have so much technology, power, but we also have world situations that are pretty dire, obviously, in many ways. And all like, we're facing monumental challenges on a global scale, geopolitical stuff, like everything. Yeah. So I really do think that mass awakening is kind of what we need.
But just what you said, when you said there's an aspect of this thing that it's already equanimous or whatever, it's already balanced and peaceful and perfect. That like gave me relief in real time. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. That it's almost like the nature of the ego is, and I didn't coin this, but I remember it. It's almost like the nature of the ego is it wants to survive so bad it'll destroy itself to do it. Like,
that's right.
I will survive, and if I can't win, then I'll blow the whole thing up, type thing. And it would be nice that the more people, I think, could be enlightened, so that at least if that happens, we get a good light show and we don't, we enjoy it or something.
That's a really good point.
So, Angelo, I guess my last question for you is, what are you up to? What can people who are doing this, they see this conversation that we're having, where can they find you? What are you up to? What do you got going on? Let our audience know.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So I have a website called simplyalwaysawake.com. If you go to www.simplyalwaysawake, all one word, .com /links, you'll find links to literally everything I have. And I have a lot of stuff. I have an app that's got guided meditations that are very direct, non-dual type guided meditations. They're all free. It's like there's 70 of them or something. I have a page you can go to look for retreats. If you want to go to retreats, I have my YouTube channel, TikTok, like whatever your flavor is, whatever you like. I have Instagram. So
he's everywhere.
I put out videos all over. I really just try to reach different people and different demographics. Just recently started a Hindi channel. So if you speak Hindi, my videos are dubbed into Hindi. I started a Spanish channel today. They're going to be dubbed into Spanish and then Chinese or Mandarin. Oh, wow. So all those are available. And I would say really start with my book if you're interested in this. The book is the most, not necessarily concise, it's the clearest, because it took me a long time to refine all the language and point just the way I wanted to. And, even though writing can be really, can take a long time and be arduous, it's beautiful in that you can say exactly what you want to say if you take enough time to say it and do enough revisions. And I did. So my book really is the go-to if you really want to pick this up. And then second to that, I would say check out my YouTube channel and look at my Basics of Awakening playlist. and my Awakening Approaches playlist. I have everything in playlists on my channel from beginning to end, and emotion work and all the different things. So those are where I would start if somebody's interested. There are other good teachers. Check out Eckhart Tolle has a book called The Power of Now, which is very accessible. It's a wonderful book. It's really a sort of gateway book for a lot of people into
classic. It's a
awakening
classic.
and non-duality. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So Eckhart Tolle, and there's another teacher named Adya Shanti that I just love, and I like to say his name a lot because his writing is wonderful, his retreats are wonderful, and he's just a really great teacher. So there's tons of resources out there. Check them out.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Angelo, thank you so much for this time. This was amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. This was great. And I hope people, they go and they find your stuff.
Thanks, guys. You were awesome.
Thank you
The
again.
questions were extremely well thought out. It was just a blast. Really fun. Thank you.